Ba 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 ba. You be you be you be you be you you. Ya be ya ba 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 ba. Like he da 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 da. Di da 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 he da 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 da. Di da 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 he da 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 la. La da 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 di da 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 da. Ay 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 ya di da. Ya ba 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 ba. Ya di da. Ya ba 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 ba. Ya di da. Ya ba 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 ba. Ya ba 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 ba. Ay 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 ya ba ba. Ya ba 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 ba. Ya di da. Ya ba 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 ba. Ya ba ba. Ya ba 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 ba. Ya ba 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 ba.
How fun is that? Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. Great to be back with you after a few days away. That one is called Nigun on the Roof, a new song from a new album of Eitan Katz called Teruma. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. We're doing a highlight show today covering 4 pages. And these 4 pages have had a lot of interesting material. So, who's with us tonight? Pauline in Chicagoland, Stephen in New Hampshire, Yehud in South Carolina, Rose in New Mexico, Tom in PA, James in Annapolis, Guy in Ohio, Christina in Texas, Paul in Chicago, Melissa in Great Neck, Sharon in New Jersey, Gwen in Michigan, Nancy, North Carolina, Paul in the Great Northwest, Paula says shalom, Karen in Northern California, Sammy in Dallas, Zenaida in Florida, Paula loves the moose, Renee in Indiana, Tori from the LBC. That would be Long Beach, I believe. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't get this going here. Let me get YouTube in front of me. Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. 4 dafs, pages 46 through 49. We'll be doing some highlights. So, during Chag, those final days of Passover, I can't take notes like I normally do, so I put in my stickies to define which areas we're going to be doing. And I got a bit of a beard more than I like. I get very uncomfortable in a beard. I love beards. I wish I could have a beard. My skin does not support a beard. I get very itchy. And we actually looked it up today. Right now, there's a tradition of among traditional Jews, not to shave. It's for men. Women can do whatever they want. For men, not to shave from the beginning of the Omer until Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. Recalling the tragedy of the thousands of students of Rabbi Akiva who died in this period. But if it distresses a person to have a beard, they are permitted to shave it, and perhaps a better time to shave it would be for Shabbos. All right, let's get into it. Pages 46 through 49. We're picking this up near the bottom of 45b. A Gentile slave purchased by a Jew must be circumcised. Hold on. Which is pretty interesting, right? We don't have slavery anymore, but when you think back in ancient times, when there was such a thing as slavery, and there would be a distinction being made between the indentured servitude of a Jew who sold himself into slavery, and he must go out after a certain number of years. But if you had a non-Jewish slave, right, so then that was slavery. I mean, it was like property. But what was interesting about it was that when they would take a slave into their home, so the slave was then actually required to observe certain mitzvahs. They don't become Jews by becoming slaves, but one was supposed to circumcise the males and then obligate them to perform certain mitzvahs. And then they've actually traveled quite a distance toward becoming a Jew. And so a slave of a Jew could become a Jew. right? So it was an interesting sort of process that would take place. And we're learning somewhat about that now. So a Gentile slave purchased by a Jew must be circumcised and then immersed in a ritual bath. By being immersed for the sake of slavery, he takes on the status of a full slave, which among other things obligates him to keep certain mitzvahs. However, if the slave or any Gentile is immersed for the sake of conversion, he then becomes a full Jew and fully obligated in mitzvahs like any other Jew. Now, when you think about the process of conversion, if you are a convert, if you've known people who converted, if you've explored conversion to Judaism, it is a very, very long and difficult process that involves a lot of learning, right? There are so many mitzvahs that a Jew has to keep, and the convert, once he converts, is a Jew and is obligated in all the mitzvahs, and will be held accountable like any Jew for not performing the positive mitzvahs or for violating the negative mitzvahs, right? The thou shalt not or the thou shalts. So any Jew who doesn't keep positive mitzvahs or who violates the negative prohibitions will be held accountable for them. And one who converts to Judaism has to know what the mitzvahs are so that they will know what it is that they're obligated to do. That's not mentioned in this paragraph that we just read. It seems like, well, if somebody immerses for the sake of becoming a Jew, then they become a Jew. Yeah, not so quick. Not so quick. Let's keep reading. The Gemara considers the result of different intentions accompanying an immersion, right? An immersion in a mikveh. Rabbi Chiya bar Ami's slave immersed a certain Gentile woman for the sake of having intimate relations with her, i.e. to purify her from her menstrual impurity, right? So that she counted her clean days after menstruating and then would be permitted. I mean, that's something Jewish women do. Rav Yosef said, I am able to render both her and her daughter fit to marry into the congregation of Israel, meaning they're Jewish. With regard to her, I can render her fit in accordance with the opinion of Rav Asi. As Rav Asi said concerning a woman whose status as a convert was unclear, but who lived as a part of the Jewish people and acted like all other Jewish women, didn't she immerse for the sake of purifying herself from menstruation? Meaning, didn't she immerse as a Jewish woman would? Therefore, even if the original immersion was invalid, her intention in subsequent immersions was sufficient to be considered for the sake of conversion, since ultimately she immersed as an expression of her commitment to Judaism. She is therefore fully Jewish, according to that opinion. And with regard to her daughter, she is the daughter of a Gentile or slave who engaged in intercourse with a Jewish woman, and the law is that the lineage of the offspring is unflawed. As we've seen, if a Jewish woman were to have relations with a Gentile or a slave and mother to child, that child is Jewish because she's Jewish. And the Gemara details the circumstances of Rav Asi's ruling. There was a certain man. Why does it do that? Sorry. Let me just... There we go. The Gemara details the circumstances of Rav Asi's ruling. There was a certain man whom people would call son of the Aramean woman, as they cast aspersions on the validity of his mother's conversion. Now, with regard to that case, Rav Asi said, didn't she immerse for the sake of purifying herself from her menstruation? A similar incident is recounted. There was a certain man whom people would call son of an Aramean man, as they cast aspersions on the validity of his father's conversion. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, didn't he immerse for the sake of purifying himself from his seminal emission? And that intention is sufficient to consider the immersion as an immersion for the sake of conversion. What does the halacha say on this? Where did it come out? In order to become Jewish, right? So now I'm reading this is the law as it stands today, citing Shulchan Aruch. In order to become Jewish, a convert is required to declare that he accepts upon him or herself to observe the mitzvahs, right? So it is not enough to just immerse and say, I want to be Jewish. You have to declare that you accept upon yourself to observe the mitzvahs like every other Jew. And he must then be circumcised and immersed, all in the presence of a court of three. If a convert did not declare his acceptance of the mitzvahs or was not immersed in the presence of a court of three, then the conversion can still be valid if it is apparent that he had continued to observe the mitzvahs and Jewish customs and had immersed for the sake of purifying himself from a discharge of semen. In ancient times, when the temple was standing, if you would have a nocturnal emission, that would render you tameh. You'd have to immerse to become tahor, ritually pure, before you could enter the temple grounds. That kind of immersion we no longer do. And he had continued to observe the mitzvahs, and Jewish customs had immersed for the sake of purifying himself from a discharge of semen, or in the case of a female convert, that she had immersed to purify herself from menstruation. In any case, if the convert married a Jewish woman, a child born from that union is not rendered unfit. Now, there's a lot more to it. Obviously, it's way beyond the scope of this class. I will just comment why it is. It's a controversy you sometimes hear about in the Jewish world that is not really considered controversial in traditional Judaism, which is that a reform or conservative conversion is flawed. And what is the reason for that? Because the person who is becoming a Jew through that conversion is committing basically to become a reform or conservative Jew. And because the reform and conservative movements do not, follow the law in terms of performing all the mitzvahs, right? Simply put, if you're planning to drive to Shul on Shabbos, you can make many reasons, many justifications why somebody would do that. But basically, if it's not to save a life, you don't get in the car on Shabbos, right? So if you're not committing to keep all the mitzvahs, then at the outset, that conversion is problematic. Somebody who did such a conversion and then starts living an Orthodox lifestyle, that's an interesting case because then they are shomer mitzvahs. They're keeping all the mitzvahs. So you could question the conversion at the time of conversion. Very interesting. Usually what happens is people who, maybe start out by doing a reform or conservative conversion and then really become ensconced in the community and want to live as traditional Jews or Orthodox Jews, depending on your terminology, they might do a later conversion, which would actually be less difficult because they've already been living as a Jew. They've gone through that education, and it's just kind of a finalizing process. And somebody who's considering converting to Judaism, I would advise, think carefully about how you want to do that, because if you do essentially an Orthodox conversion, then that conversion is accepted throughout the Jewish world. Whereas, the way things are, a Reform conversion or conservative conversion is not accepted throughout the Jewish world. That's really all, I'm not making judgments here. I'm just telling you the reality in the Jewish world. Somebody considering conversion or thinking about conversion, want to know more about conversion, there's many resources out there that you should look into beyond the scope of this class. Okay, now we go on to page 46, near the bottom of 46a. The Gemara relates, Rabbi Chiya bar Abba once happened to come to Gavla. He saw Jewish women there who had become pregnant from converts who were circumcised but had still not immersed to complete their conversion process. And he saw wine of Jews that Gentiles were pouring, and Jews were drinking it. And he saw lupines, which are a kind of legume, that Gentiles were cooking, and Jews were eating them, but he did not say anything to them. Later, he came before Rabbi Yochanan and told him what he had witnessed. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, "Go and make a public declaration concerning their children that they are mamzers, and concerning their wine that it is forbidden, because it is like wine poured as an idolatrous libation, and concerning their lupines that they are forbidden because they are food cooked by Gentiles." Right? Somebody who keeps kosher cannot have his wine. There's two different kinds of kosher wine, mevushal and non-mevushal. Mevushal basically means it's been flash pasteurized, and so it is finished. It won't change anymore. And so then if a non-Jewish waiter pours that for you, it's okay. Non-mevushal wine is sort of continuing to age and evolve in the bottle. And a non-Jew, and even a Jew who's not a Shomer Shabbos Jew, cannot pour that wine for a Shomer Shabbos Jew. We're not getting into that today either, but this bears a little bit on what we're reading here. Okay. And one should be stringent and make such a declaration, said Rabbi Yochanan, because these people are not well versed in Torah, and if they are left to be lax in this regard, they will eventually transgress Torah prohibitions. Better to come in hardcore, let them know that they're in danger of, becoming non-Jewish with all these violations that they're doing, and perhaps they will come back as a group to Torah observance. The Gemara explains, with regard to the declaration concerning that they're children, that they are mamzers, Rabbi Yochanan conforms to his standard line of reasoning in two laws. The first is, as Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, that Rabbi Yochanan said, one is never considered to be a convert until he has circumcised and immersed. And since the convert in the case in Gavla had not immersed, he is still considered a Gentile even though he's circumcised. And the second law is, as Rabbi Bar Chana said, that Rabbi Yochanan said, with regard to a Gentile or a slave who engaged in intercourse with a Jewish woman, the offspring of that union is a mamzer. And the reason to declare, and we know that's not the law, right? The child of a Jewish woman is Jewish, always, no matter who the father is. But we had this other opinion that we've been discussing in recent days. And the reason to declare concerning their wine that it is forbidden, because it is like wine poured as an idolatrous libation, in that, although their wine was not actually poured as an idolatrous libation, it was prohibited by rabbinic decree due to the maxim that, go, we say to the Nazir, go around, but do not come near to the vineyard. Although a Nazir is prohibited only from eating produce of the vine, he is warned not even to come into close proximity of a vineyard as a protective measure, a fence around the Torah, to ensure that he will not transgress this prohibition. And so too, in many cases, the sages decreed certain items and actions to be prohibited because they understood that if people would partake of them, they would eventually transgress Torah prohibitions. I know there's not too many non-Jews in the world these days who are taking wine and pouring it as a libation for their idol, that they're committing idolatry. Nevertheless, that law has remained that you can't drink wine that was poured by a Gentile. And the final declaration concerning their lupines, that they are forbidden because they are food cooked by Gentiles, is issued because they are not well versed in Torah. And the Gemara expresses astonishment. Does this imply that were they students of the Torah, their lupines would be permitted? Didn't Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzhak say in the name of Rav, any food item that is eaten as it is, raw, is not subject to the prohibition of food cooked by Gentiles, even when it is cooked. But a lupine is not eaten as it is, raw, and therefore it is subject to the prohibition of food cooked by Gentiles. And the Gemara explains that Rabbi Yochanan holds in this matter, in accordance with the opinion of the other version of what Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzhak said in the name of Rav, any food that lacks sufficient importance, that it does not appear on the table of kings in order to eat bread with it, is not subject to the prohibition of food cooked by Gentiles. Lupines lack importance and are therefore permitted even if cooked by Gentiles, and consequently the only reason to make a declaration prohibiting the residents of Gavla from eating them is because they are not well versed in Torah, and if they are left to be lax in this regard, they will eventually become lax in actual Torah prohibitions, and by inference, to those well versed in Torah, it is permitted to eat those lupines, or lupines, I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong. Okay, skipping forward, we're on 46b near the bottom. Remember, we're covering highlights of 4 pages today because I was away, final days of the holiday. Then we went to a memorial service yesterday that conflicted with our class, and now we're doing 4 pages today. Now we are on 46b near the bottom. The sages taught in a baraisa with regard to someone who came and said, I am a convert. One might have thought that we should accept him. He says he's a convert, so he's in. Therefore, the verse states, and if a convert sojourns with you in your land, you shall not oppress him. Now, the emphasis on with you suggests that only someone who was already presumed by you to be a valid convert should be accepted as a convert, meaning it's known which Beis Din, which court converted him, right? Before which rabbis he learned and converted and became one of the Jewish people. If he came and brought witnesses to his conversion with him, from where is it derived that he is to be accepted? It is from the beginning of that verse, which states, and if a convert sojourns with you in your land. Now, I have derived only that a convert is accepted in the land of Israel. From where do I derive that also outside of Eretz Yisrael he is to be accepted? The verse states, with you, which indicates that in any place that he is with you, you accept him. If so, what is the meaning when the verse states in the land? This indicates that in the land of Israel, he needs to bring evidence that he is a convert, but outside the land of Israel, he does not need to bring evidence that he is a convert. Rather, his claim is acceptance. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. But the rabbis say whether he is in the land of Israel or whether he's outside the land of Israel, he needs to bring evidence. And that is the truth. You know, if somebody that you just that comes and says, hey, I'm a convert, so then he also has to bring evidence of his conversion, which if he converted, won't be difficult to find. He'll have a letter from the rabbi that converted him, the court that converted him. This is a big issue these days. The rabbinate in Israel does not accept conversions from, anybody or everybody. There's a list sort of approved rabbis. And if somebody wants to, show up in Israel and say, I'm a Jew, but he was born of a non-Jewish mother and he converted, then he's going to have to bring that evidence. What is the law? One who comes and says, I converted, if one presumed to be a Gentile comes and claims to have converted in accordance with the halachas of conversion, whether in the land of Israel or outside the land of Israel, he is not accepted as a convert and may not marry into the congregation of Israel until he brings witnesses to his conversion. And this ruling is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbi. So that is the law and remains the law to this day. And tragically, there have been some people who abuse this. I mean, there was a case that was written up in Ami magazine about this whole family who were actually proselytizing to convert Jews to another religion, posing as full-on ultra-Orthodox Jews in an extremely frum community in Israel. And, they were just sort of like making relationships and making friends and then starting to talk to people quietly, about a different religion. It was absolutely, they were not converts and their motives were not good. And eventually they were found out and kicked out. And for that reason, this law is in place. Okay, we skip forward, 47a. Sort of a little bit of the way down. And the Gemara relates there was an incident involving one who was presumed to be Jewish, who came before Rabbi Yehuda and said to him, I converted in private, and therefore I am not actually Jewish. Rabbi Yehuda said to him, do you have witnesses to support your claim? He said to him, no. Rabbi Yehuda said, do you have children? He said to him, yes. Rabbi Yehuda said to him, you are deemed credible in order to render yourself unfit to marry a Jewish woman by claiming that you are a Gentile. But you are deemed not credible in order to render your children unfit. This is fascinating. However this incident, got going, how this story started out, so this person did some kind of a private conversion that was not fully valid. However, after that, was living a fully Jewish life, and so were his kids, and everyone assumed that they were Jews. There was no issues. And so later, maybe he learned that, oh, wow, I think my conversion wasn't valid. So that's why he came before Rabbi Yehuda. And he said, I did it in private. I didn't do it in front of a court who witnessed my immersion and read to me the litany of conversion, etc. And so I guess my conversion is not valid. And Rabbi Yehuda said, do you have witnesses to that? He says, no, I did it in private. So Rabbi Yehuda says, okay, do you have children? Yes. And so what Rabbi Yehuda was saying to him is, you're now seeking to change your own status from the presumption that we have that you are Jews and your families are Jews. In that case, you can render yourself unfit through this testimony against yourself by this confession, as it were. But your children, no. You're not going to undermine their status without bringing witnesses. And since they're already presumed to be Jewish, I mean, who knows? Maybe this guy somehow has some kind of a grudge against his wife or his kids, and he could be lying now. and seeking to undermine the kid's ability to get married properly, and come out with this story that his conversion was not valid. And therefore, in the absence of witnesses, he can render himself unfit, but not his kids. The Gemara asks, but did Rabbi Yehuda actually say that with regard to his children, he is not deemed credible? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa? The verse states, he shall acknowledge Yakir, the firstborn, the son of the hated, by giving him a double portion of all that he has. And the phrase, he shall acknowledge, is apparently superfluous. It is therefore expounded to teach that the father is deemed credible so that he can identify him to others. Now, this is taken from the passage, I believe, in Deuteronomy, where they're talking about that a soldier went to war. He brought a captive woman back, because he was pretty much in lust with her, took her as a slave, and then married her. And then had children by her, and then later thought, who have I brought into my home? I really should marry someone from my community. Took a second wife, and then took to liking his second wife and his kids from her better than that first hated wife and her child, who was his firstborn. But he cannot deny that child anything of the rights of the firstborn. That's what the Torah passage is talking about. Here it's being used to derive a law, right? The father is deemed credible so that he can identify him, Yakirenu, to others. From here, Rabbi Yehuda said, a man is deemed credible to say, this is my firstborn son. And just as he is deemed credible to say, this is my firstborn son, so too a priest is deemed credible to say, this son of mine is the son of a divorced woman and myself, or to say he is the son of a chalutza and myself, and therefore my son is disqualified to serve as a priest due to his flawed lineage. And the rabbis say he is not deemed credible. Right? So the rabbis come out to the same place that we just attributed to Rabbi Yehuda, that you can't undermine your son's status without bringing further witnesses. But in that case, Rabbi Yehuda seemed to disagree with them. If Rabbi Yehuda holds that a father is deemed credible to render his children unfit, why did he rule otherwise in the case of the convert? Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said that this is what Rabbi Yehuda said to him. According to your statement, you are a Gentile, and there is no testimony for a Gentile, as a Gentile is disqualified as a witness before a rabbinic court. Consequently, since you made yourself a Gentile, you rendered yourself a Gentile by telling me this, now you can't testify against your children. Ravina said that this is what Rabbi Yehuda said to him. Do you have children? He said yes. He said to him, do you have grandchildren? He said yes. He said to him, you are deemed credible in order to render your children unfit, based on the phrase, he shall acknowledge, but you are not deemed credible in order to render your grandchildren unfit, as the verse affords a father credibility only with respect to his children. What is the law? A father is deemed credible to render his son unfit. For example, if he were to say that the son of his wife is not actually his own son and is therefore a mamzer. Now, this is true only if that son does not have any children. If the son does have children, then the father is not believed, even with regard to his own son. And this is in accordance with the opinion of Ravina. And the Rima, citing the Rama, writes that if the son was presumed to be legitimate based on the testimony of his father, and then the father is no longer able to render him unfit. In addition, a man is deemed credible to render unfit only someone who was always presumed to be his son. In other words, the child born to his wife. Therefore, if a single woman announces that her son is actually the child of so-and-so, that man is not deemed credible to claim that the child is a mamzer. We're moving very fast. There's a lot of very interesting laws here, but it's an interesting balance that the rabbis are striking between believing somebody when they're bringing testimony that that is unfavorable to himself, and therefore why would he do that? It must be true, so we want to believe him. But on the other hand, if that same testimony is going to have very unfavorable impact on somebody else, we're going to be very careful about accepting such testimony. Okay, we're at the bottom of 47a now. The sages taught in a baraisa with regard to a potential convert who comes to a court in order to convert. At the present time, when the Jews are in exile, The court say to him, the judges of the court say to him. So now we're getting a little bit beyond. It's, as I said earlier, it's not minimal requirements, just, circumcise yourself and immerse if you're a man and you're a Jew. There's other requirements, right? He has to take on all the mitzvahs, and he has to make the statement that we're going to read about here. I once served on a Beis Din for an invalid conversion. I didn't know better. It was a long time ago. But I do remember the person converting was asked about these kinds of questions, which was fascinating. Meaning when they talk about now in the present time, meaning when the Jews are exiled from their land. Now, there is a modern state of Israel, but it's not like Mashiach has come, the third temple has been built, and the Jews are ascendant in the world. So we're still in this period where there's tremendous amounts of Jew hatred in the world. The Jews have enemies right and left. Jews are being persecuted. Jews are being murdered and assassinated just out of Jew hatred, etc. It's very challenging sometimes to be a Jew in this world. It brings incredible meaning and joy, etc. But one might think twice before joining the Jewish people and subjecting oneself to be the object of all the Jew hatred in the world. So, the judges of the court say to him, now they're talking about 1,500 years ago in the time of the Gemara, but this is still true today. The judges of the court say to him, what did you see that motivated you to come to convert to Judaism? Don't you know that the Jewish people at the present time are anguished, suppressed, despised, and harassed, and hardships are frequently visited upon them? And if he says, I know, and although I am unworthy of joining the Jewish people and sharing in their sorrow, I nevertheless desire to do so, then the court accepts him immediately to begin the conversion process. And the judges of the court inform him of some of the lenient mitzvahs and some of the stringent mitzvahs. And they inform him of the sin of neglecting the mitzvah to allow the poor to take gleanings, forgotten sheaves, and produce in the corner of one's field, and about the poor man's tithe. Now that's a very beautiful teaching right there. You're thinking about becoming Jewish. You should know that in addition to all the other obligations that are going to be incumbent upon you, you are going to have to give money regularly to the needy, a measured amount, right? We call it Meiser. I've talked about this before. Nina and I have a Meiser account. Any income that we receive, 10% right away goes into that separate account, and the job of that account is to be depleted as we give gifts to the needy. We're not rich people, but we have a philanthropic account. And every Jew, even one who lives by handouts from other people, is obligated to tithe and to give 10% to the needy. Not to your synagogue, not to the Jewish administration, as it were. It's fully up to you who you give it to, but it has to be to causes that come under the umbrella of Meiser, right? So, like to feed and shelter and educate the needy. Okay, where am I? So they inform him of this prospective convert. They inform him of some of the lenient mitzvahs, some of the lenient commandments, and some of the stringent commandments. And they inform him of the sin of neglecting to allow the poor to take gleanings and forgotten sheaves from the field, and leaving the corner of the field, and the poor man's tithe. And they inform him of the punishment for transgressing the mitzvahs. As follows, they say to him, be aware that before you came to this status and converted, had you eaten forbidden fat, you would not be punished by excision, by death at the hands of the heavenly court. And if you had profaned Shabbos, you would not be punished by stoning, since these prohibitions do not apply to non-Jews. But now, once converted, if you have eaten forbidden fat, you are punished by charis. And if you have profaned Shabbos, you are punished by stoning. Obviously, if you profane Shabbos, you have to be warned that if you do that, you're going to be subject to the death penalty, and then you do it anyway, right after the warning, and there's two witnesses, and they bring you before a Beis Din who is willing to execute you for that. Hasn't happened maybe ever since, but they could have happened, right? They did execute in the wilderness when the children of Israel came out of Israel and first received the commandment of Shabbos. That was sort of the example for all time. But nevertheless, you will be held before the heavenly court accountable for every prohibition that you violated. And just as they inform him about the punishment for transgressing the mitzvahs, so too they inform him about the reward granted for fulfilling him. They say, for fulfilling them. They say to him, be aware that the world to come is made only for the righteous, and if you observe the mitzvahs, you will merit it. And be aware that the Jewish people at the present time are unable to receive their full reward in this world. They are not able to receive either an abundance of good nor an abundance of calamities, since the primary place for reward and punishment is in the world to come. And they do not overwhelm him with threats, and they are not exacting with him about all the details of the mitzvahs. If he accepts upon himself all these ramifications, then they circumcise him immediately. If there still remain on him shreds of flesh from the foreskin that invalidate the circumcision, they circumcise him again a second time to remove them. When he is healed from the circumcision, they immerse him immediately, and 2 Torah scholars stand over him at the time of his immersion and inform him of some of the lenient mitzvahs and some of the stringent mitzvahs. Once he has immersed and emerged, then he is a Jew in every sense. Right? Once you go through this whole process, you are indistinguishable from one who was born a Jew. For the immersion of a woman, women appointed by the court seat her in the water of the mikveh, the ritual bath, up to her neck, and 2 Torah scholars stand outside the bathhouse so as not to compromise her modesty. And from there, they inform her of some of the lenient mitzvahs and some of the stringent mitzvahs. The procedure applies for both a convert and an emancipated slave, who, upon immersion at the time of his emancipation, becomes a Jew in every sense. And in the same place that a menstruating woman immerses, i.e. in a ritual bath of 40 sa of water, there a convert and an emancipated slave also immerse. And anything that interposes between one's body and the water of the ritual bath with regard to immersion of a ritually impure person in a manner that would invalidate the immersion also interposes and invalidates the immersion for a convert and for an emancipated slave and for a menstruating woman. There cannot be anything on your skin that interposes between you and the waters of the mikveh for any of these purposes. Skip a couple of paragraphs. We are on 47b. And the Baraisa continues, and they inform him of the sin of neglecting the mitzvah to allow the poor to take gleanings, forgotten sheaves, and produce of the corner of one's field. And they do not overwhelm him with threats, and they are not exacting with him about the details of the mitzvahs. Rabbi Elazar said, what is the verse from which this ruling is derived? As it is written, and so we, for most of the laws of conversion, we look to the book of Ruth and the story of Naomi and Ruth. Ruth, who was a Moabitess who converted to Judaism and actually became the ancestor of King David. So from here we derive. The verse states, Ruth 1:18, and when Naomi saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, she left off speaking with her. Right? So the teaching that we try to discourage a convert comes from Naomi discouraging Ruth. Why do we discourage a convert? Because there is a place in the world to come for righteous Gentiles. You don't have to be a Jew to have a place in the world to come. You just follow the 7 Noahide laws, which is not so simple, but it's much easier than the 613 mitzvahs that are incumbent on a Jew. You don't need to become a Jew to have a place in paradise. But if you want to become a Jew and live among the Jewish people, then you're going to be obligated in all those commandments. So before you converted, you weren't obligated. Now you're going to be obligated. Are you sure you want to do this? Because if you're not ready to live up to all these obligations, why end up in a situation where you're going to end up kind of in a lower place at the end of your life because you didn't fulfill all these mitzvahs? You're good as a non-Jew. If you want to become a Jew, then you're going to be held to the standards of a Jew, and that's why we discourage potential converts for their benefit. If they keep saying, no, I get it, I understand why you're discouraging me, I'm in, I want to be in, after 3 times of discouraging, then of course they're welcomed in. Welcome to at least go through the whole conversion process, which is long and difficult. Now, when Naomi set out to return to the land of Israel, Ruth insisted on joining her. And the Gemara understands this to mean that Ruth wished to convert. Naomi attempted to dissuade her, but Ruth persisted. The verse states that once Naomi saw Ruth's resolve to convert, she desisted from her attempts to dissuade her. And the Gemara infers from here the same approach should be taken by a court in all cases of conversion. The Gemara reconstructs the original dialogue in which Naomi attempted to dissuade Ruth from converting. Naomi said to her, "On Shabbos, it is prohibited for us to go beyond the Shabbos limit. We can only walk 2,000 amos from the limit." Ruth responded, "Where you go, I shall go, and no further." Right? I will observe the same limit. Naomi said to her, "It is forbidden for us to be alone together with a man with whom it is forbidden to engage in relations." Ruth responded, "Where you lodge, I shall lodge, and in the same manner." Naomi said to her, "We are commanded to observe 613 mitzvahs." Ruth responded, "Your people are my people." And Naomi said to her, "Idolatrous worship is forbidden to us." Ruth responded, "Your God is my God." Naomi said to her, 4 types of capital punishment were handed over to a court with which to punish those who transgress the mitzvahs. Ruth responded, "Where you die, I shall die." Naomi said to her, 2 burial grounds were handed over to the court, one for those executed for more severe crimes, and another for those executed for less severe crimes. Ruth responded, "And there I shall be buried." Immediately following this dialogue, the verse states, "And when she saw that she was steadfastly minded, she left off speaking with her." Once Naomi saw Ruth's resolve to convert, she desisted from her attempts to dissuade her. Skip another couple of paragraphs, and the Baraisa states, "Once he has immersed and emerged, he is a Jew in every sense." And the Gemara asks, with regard to what law is this stated? It is that if he reverts back to behaving as a Gentile, he nevertheless remains Jewish. And so, if he betroths a Jewish woman, although he is considered to be an apostate Jew, his betrothal is a valid betrothal. Right? That is the thing about converting to Judaism. Once you do it, you're a Jew forever. So, if you got into it for the wrong reasons, then later said, "Yeah, not for me," okay, but now you're a Jew. So since you turn your back on the Jewish people and Jewish observance, you're going to be penalized for that like any Jew would be. We skip forward on to 48a. We're near the bottom of 48a. Having cited it above, the Gemara focuses on the case of the beautiful female prisoner of war. The sages taught, the verse states, "And she shall shave her head and do her nails," Deuteronomy 21:12. Now the phrase "do her nails" is ambiguous. Rabbi Eliezer says it means she cuts her nails. Rabbi Akiva says it means she grows her nails. Each Tana, each rabbi of the Mishna, explains the basis of his opinion. Rabbi Eliezer said, an act of doing is stated with regard to the head, that she should shave her head. And an act of doing is stated with regard to her nails. Just as there, with regard to the hair on her head, the Torah requires its removal, so too here, with regard to her nails, the Torah requires their removal. Rabbi Akiva says, an act of doing is stated with regard to the head, that she should shave it, and an act of doing is stated with regard to the nails, just as there, with regard to the hair on her head, the Torah requires that she do something that makes her repulsive. So too here, with regard to her nails, the Torah requires that she do something that makes her repulsive. Repulsive is a pretty strong word here, but that's the one they're using, i.e. allowing them to grow. Right? That long nails were considered repulsive back then. And a proof for the statement of Rabbi Eliezer may be adduced from the verse that states, and Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king, and he had neither done his feet nor done his mustache. 2 Samuel 19:25. What is the meaning of doing in that context? Clearly it means the removal of his toenails and his mustache. We skip forward to the end of page 48b. It is taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Hananiah, the son of Rabban Gamliel, says, for what reason are converts at the present time tormented and hardships come upon them. What does it mean? Converts are tormented, right? We have a very clear commandment in the Torah that a person who converts, you're not even permitted to remind them that they converted or in any way treat them differently like you would treat any other Jew. What are they talking about here? What they're saying is the convert who joins the Jewish people at a time when the Jewish people are oppressed, as it were, right? We don't have the holy state of Israel, meaning with the third temple in place, etc. Mashiach hasn't come. So one who joins the Jewish people, does so from, probably from such a holy place, such a holy motive. Why wouldn't they just have a huge reward in this world? So that's what the Gemara is commenting on. Why are they tormented in the same way that all the Jews are? It is because when they were Gentiles, they did not observe the 7 Noahide mitzvahs. Right? You would think, don't we all observe the 7 Noahide mitzvahs? We don't tear a limb from a living animal. We don't murder. Probably we're not practicing idolatry. No, it's not so simple to follow the Noahide laws. The first one of the Noahide laws is to know who God is and that God runs the world. So to do that requires regular study, right? So this person didn't do that while he was a Gentile. Rabbi Yosef says they would not be punished for their deeds prior to their conversion because a convert who just converted is like a child just born in that he retains no connection to his past life. So he's not being punished for something that he did before he converted. Rather, for what reason are converts tormented? It is because they are not as well versed in the intricacies of the mitzvahs as a born Jew, and consequently they often inadvertently transgress mitzvahs. Abba Hanan says in the name of Rabbi Elazar, no, it is because they observe mitzvahs not out of love of God, but only out of fear of the punishments for failing to observe them. But others say it is because they waited before entering under the wings of the Shekhinah, meaning before they became a Jew and entered the wings of the divine presence, i.e., they are punished for not converting sooner than they did. Rabbi Abahu disagrees, and some say it was Rabbi Hanina who said, what is the verse from which it is derived that one should convert at the earliest opportunity? Boaz said to Ruth, the Lord recompense your work, and your reward shall be complete from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And that completes the discussion of converts, right? It's not easy, it's wonderful, it's meaningful, it's joyous and glorious to be a Jew, but there's certain challenges of being a Jew in this world. And joining the Jewish people is going to bring you the same kind of challenges. By the way, what we read just there, according to that one opinion, that one who converts, it's difficult for them and they often make mistakes because they didn't grow up in it and there's just stuff they don't know. Yeah, so that's also true of the Baal Tshuva, like Nina and me. We didn't grow up as traditional observant Jews, and so all the time, and we just... It never ceases to amaze us how many mistakes there are to be made. With people who grew up in this world, stuff that they just know instinctively because they've always done it, you just got to learn as you go along. But there's tremendous reward for making that effort. Okay, now we're on 49a, and this is the final page that we're doing tonight. And we have a new Mishnah. We've been discussing Mishnah number 9 here in chapter 4 of Tractate Yevamos, the 14th volume of the Talmud. And now we go to Mishnah number 10 of chapter 4. Which offspring of forbidden relations have the status of a mamzer? We've been having a lot of conversation about who is a mamzer, why are they a mamzer, but they were already kind of like second level technical questions, and now, as so often happens, we're going to the more basic definition of what a mamzer is later. Right? How many times have we seen that the Gemara looks at more complicated questions and then later comes to the more basic questions, just the way it is. So now let's understand who is a mamzer. It is the offspring of a union with any next of kin that is subject to a Torah prohibition that he should not engage in sexual relations with them. That is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. So if the Torah says you shall not have sexual relations with your wife's sister, or with your brother's wife, or with your father's wife, like his second wife, or any other people on that list that's in the Torah, and you do it and it produces a child, that's a mamzer, according to Rabbi Akiva. Shimon Hatimni says it is the offspring of a union with any forbidden relation for which one is liable to receive kares at the hand of heaven. And the halacha, the law, is in accordance with his statement, right? Shimon Hatimni. Rabbi Yehoshua says it is the offspring of a union with any forbidden relation for which one is liable to receive court-imposed capital punishment. That's a different standard, right? These other relations that are prohibited in the Torah, and you receive kares, right? It means you'll be punished in heaven for that. Maybe you'll have your life shortened by heaven. But court-imposed capital punishment, that's a different standard. There's not that many cases of that to begin with. Is that the only cases that produce a mamzer? Before we continue reading the Mishnah, let's read the halacha. From Shulchan Aruch. Which offspring have the status of a mamzer? The offspring born of a forbidden union, for which one is liable to kares, or a court-imposed death penalty, is a mamzer, irrespective of whether the sexual relations were engaged in willfully or otherwise. This is true with the exception of the offspring of a union with a menstruating woman, which is not a mamzer. This is in accordance with the opinion of Shimon Hatimni, since the Gemara rules in accordance with his opinion. Now we continue the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon ben Azai said, I found a scroll recording people's lineages in Jerusalem, and it was written in it that so-and-so is a mamzer from an adulterous union with a married woman, a sin punished by court-imposed capital punishment. The adultery, right? That's the sin punished by capital punishment. The only reason for the scroll to state the reason that this individual is a mamzer is in order to support the statement of Rabbi Yehoshua. The Mishnah delineates the circumstances in which it is prohibited to engage in relations with the sister of one's wife and the sister of one's Yevama. Right? We are in Tractate Yevamos after all, right? So your Yevama, right? So man died childless, he has a widow and a brother. So this brother has to perform either chalitza or yibum with his Yevama. What he certainly cannot do prior to performing either chalitza or yibum, or after, is to have relations with the Yevama's sister. So if a man's wife died, he is permitted to her sister. If he divorced her and then she died, he is permitted to her sister. If he divorced his wife and then she was married to another and then died, he is permitted to her sister. If his Yevama died, he is permitted to her sister. If he performed chalitza with her and then she died, he is permitted to her sister. If after chalitza she was married to another man and then died, then he is permitted to her sister. Until this woman dies, he's never permitted to her sister, right? The principle underlying all these cases is that the prohibition against engaging in relations with your wife's sister or your Yevama's sister is while she is alive, irrespective of their current relationship to the man. If she was once your wife, or if she was once your Yevama, you cannot be with her sister while that woman is alive. Gemara. What is Rabbi Akiva's reasoning? As it is written, a man shall not take his father's wife, and he shall not uncover his father's cloak. This teaches that a cloak that his father saw, i.e. a woman with whom his father engaged in sexual relations, the son may not uncover. And in this interpretation of the verse, Rabbi Akiva holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who said, the verse states only that such relations are forbidden, but they would not render him liable to receive kares. Perforce, but not kares. Perforce, the verse speaks of a woman raped by one's father, since she is one of the women with whom relations render one liable for violating a prohibition. The verse could not refer to one's father's wife, since relations with her render one liable to receive kares. So this is a somewhat technical explanation of why Rabbi Akiva includes more children in the category of mamzer than the majority of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says a child born of a union that is prohibited in any way is a mamzer, but the law is only if it's a child of a union that is prohibited and has a kares-bearing penalty or court-imposed death penalty. The Gemara completes its explanation of Rabbi Akiva's opinion, and in close proximity to that verse is the verse, a mamzer shall not enter the congregation of the Lord. Apparently, even from these forbidden relations, which render one liable only for the violation of a prohibition, but not kares, the offspring is a mamzer according to Rabbi Akiva. I am almost done, so if you've got questions or comments, get them in. And Shimon HaTimni holds in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who say it is with regard to the widow waiting for his father to perform levirate marriage that the verse is speaking. And it indicates that she is one of the women with whom relations render one liable to receive kares. And in close proximity to that verse is the verse, a mamzer shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Apparently, only the offspring of a union for which one is liable to receive kares is a mamzer, and the law follows Shimon HaTimni. Abaye said, all Tanaim, all rabbis of the Mishnah, agree with regard to one who engages in sexual relations with a menstruating woman or with a sota, that the offspring is not a mamzer. Right? So, obviously, it's prohibited in the Torah to have sexual relations with a woman who is menstruating. But if you do, you have violated a prohibition, but the offspring is not a mamzer. Likewise, a sota, so this is the suspected adulteress or perhaps the proven adulteress, and if her husband has sex with her, he's not supposed to do that until she's had the trial in the temple of drinking the bitter waters. After that, if she says she's innocent, she drinks the waters and she doesn't die, which is waters with some dirt from the floor of the temple and some ink from the letters of the verse of the Sota in the Torah. And if she drinks that and she doesn't die, this proves that she's innocent. Then the husband and wife are permitted to each other again. But from the time that he said, I suspect you, because she had secluded herself with a man after he warned her not to, and she did it again, until she has that trial, they're prohibited to each other. If they slept together anyway and had a child, they violated prohibition, but the child is not a mamzer. You might ask, how is it possible to produce a child if you have sex with a menstruating woman? But a menstruating woman doesn't necessarily mean like right in the midst of her monthly flow. It could mean that she has some spotting when they shouldn't have been together, but they were. With regard to a menstruating woman, the offspring is not a mamzer because one's betrothal of her takes effect, as it is stated, and her impurity shall be upon him. The phrase shall be alludes to the fact that a betrothal with her takes effect. And the verse teaches that even at the time of her menstrual impurity, betrothal with her takes effect, and since betrothal takes effect with her, the child not rendered a mamzer. And with regard to a sota too, the offspring is not a mamzer because one's betrothal of her takes effect. That concludes the reading we're going to do today. Let's see if we've got any questions. Rick, will all Jews observe all 613 mitzvahs eventually by way of reincarnation? So I think maybe what Rick is getting at is there are many mitzvahs, right? We count the 613 mitzvahs that are obligated on the Jewish people. And first of all, no one person can follow all the mitzvahs, right? Because many of the mitzvahs obligate priests, right? They're the laws of how sacrifices are brought when the temple is standing. So number one, temple is not standing and hasn't been for thousands of years, so nobody can fulfill those laws. And number two, the ones that are incumbent on a priest, only a priest can perform. And if you're not born a priest, how could you perform them? So one explanation for how a person might eventually perform all the mitzvahs is that Judaism does believe in reincarnation, and maybe we will have multiple lives, once as a priest, once as a woman, once as a man, etc. And that might be a way to fulfill all the mitzvahs. Another idea is that, well, the people as a whole can perform all the mitzvahs. Tragically, even the mitzvahs that are possible to perform, 80%, 90% of the Jewish people are just completely alienated from Judaism, don't even know what it is that they're supposed to be performing. And so the spiritual state of the entire Jewish people is, quite low and has been for a really long time. Tom, did a discharge include during intercourse with one's wife? That's a whole body of law that you really need a bigger expert, like an expert, to ask questions of, and it ain't me. We will get to a lot of these laws about what an emission is. My impression is that, even sex between husband and wife would require immersion the next day, and then waiting till nightfall before a person could enter the temple when the temple is standing. But I'm not sure, and we'll come to that. And if you want a better answer, ask a rabbi. Yosef, does conversion entail a declaration of the 13 principles of faith or just the 613 mitzvahs? I don't believe there's a declaration of Maimonides' 13 principles of faith. Probably because, that was written by Maimonides 1,000 years before the rabbis of the Mishna were talking about what a proper conversion is. Rambam said, that a proper Jew has these beliefs, that these are sort of the cornerstones of Judaism. And they're in the prayer book, and we can recite them every day, and it's a good idea to do that, although we're not obligated to. It's wonderful to study that. It is something we should believe in. But if you're a Jew and you don't believe properly, a lot of people would say, I'm not commenting on, which sins are worse than others, which mitzvahs are more important than others, because all of them are important. But general principle is action more important than belief. But basically, that conversion, what it really is, are you sure you want to do this? Why do you want to join the Jewish people? It's going to entail a lot of hardship upon you. Are you sure you want to do that? Read to them certain laws, not all of them, just a few stringent ones and a few lenient ones. But the main thing is that the convert shows that he's gone through a big education process to know what it's going to mean to live as a Jew who is shomer mitzvahs, right? Who is bound by the mitzvahs and is going to live like a Jew that is bound by the mitzvahs, particularly being shomer Shabbos, eating kosher, etc. Sharon, and what of infants who are converted as babies? I don't know how that works. I don't know. I am so far from being an expert on the laws of conversion. I had thought that when that happens, like they're Jewish and considered Jewish, and they're growing up in a Jewish home, right? Because probably the parents converted, or like adopted, right? They adopted and then were raised as Jews. I think adopted, converted like that, and raised as a Jew, I think fully Jewish. But sometimes like children who are converted as minors might need to just do like a ritual conversion later. They're not going to be tested. They're not going to have to go through stuff. But if they clearly grew up in a Jewish home that's shomer mitzvahs, they might have to do just kind of like a little ritual act to complete it when they are adults. But I'm not sure. That's just like off the top of my head, and I could well be wrong. And as I always reminding you guys, I am not a rabbi. And finally, Bill. A few days ago, there was some good-natured shenaniganry on Twitter that led to a number of Jewish pages I follow speculating on what a rabbi chess piece might move. The final decision being that whatever would be the case, the two rabbi pieces would have to move differently, since the idea of two rabbis agreeing on the rules was too far-fetched. That's funny. I never saw that. But I guess the idea was like if there was like a king, queen, bishop in chess, and now you were going to replace maybe the bishop with the rabbi piece, how would it move? And there would be two rabbi pieces, and they'd have to move differently since they could never arrive. That's hilarious. I love it. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, for page 50. And a new chapter. We'll be entering chapter 5 here in Tractate Yevamos. Have a great night.